want to introduce the participants in our debate tonight. From your left to right, the Democratic candidate for selectman, June Strunk. And the candidate on the Democratic ticket for first selectman, Danielle Chesebrough. The Republican candidate for first selectman, John Prue. And the Republican candidate for selectwoman, Debra Downey. How we're going to do this tonight, all the candidates will get an opening statement, 1 minute opening statement that we had a flip of the coin decide the order. Then we'll proceed to questions. We're going to do something a little different tonight in that the questions will alternate back and forth to the different tickets. Both candidates will have a chance, all four candidates will have a chance to respond to the questions. And they'll be using a running clock during the debate. We give them about 26 minutes each, and their timekeepers up here that will be letting them know how much time they left. And we hope this will allow for a free-flowing discussion. I know it's crowded tonight, but note the exits behind you, and the closest exit. In the event we have to, the very unlikely event, we would have to leave. We hope to go about 1 hour, and with those. And I asked the audience if we could hold our applause to the end when they give their final closing statements. But during the debate, if we could refrain from any applause or comments. That would be much appreciated, and leave the time for the candidates and be respectful to all the candidates. So with that, we'll begin with the opening statements, and Danielle Chesebrough goes first, and you have 1 minute.
Thank you so much. So first, thank you to the Como and to Paul and the team at the day, and to all of you for coming out tonight to hear directly from the candidates. This community has given my family and I so much, and serving as your first selectman is one way I know I can give back. I currently work for the United Nations, focusing on sustainable finance. For over a decade, I've worked with companies and investors to create more transparent and sustainable financial markets. I've experienced leading global and diverse teams, and I'm excited to put that experience to use here in Stonington. This, combined with my service on Stonington's Board of Finance through 2 budget cycles, and my work on our Economic Development Commission for the past 4 years, make me a unique candidate. I understand the challenges that we face, but also the opportunities we have at hand. I believe my educational, professional, and public service experience are going to be tools that I'll be able to use to draw on serving as first selectman. I wanted to add a quick note of thanks to Stonington's Democratic Town Committee for endorsing me once again as an unaffiliated candidate. Your support truly means so much. Thank you all.
Thank you. June Strunk.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is June Strunk, and I'm running for Board of Selectmen, and I'll give you 3 reasons why I'm asking for your support. My experience, my commitment, and my leadership qualities. With respect to my experience, for the past 20 years, I've served on several boards and commissions here in town. The Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center, I'm the past chair of the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center. I've served on planning and zoning, the retirement board, the K-12 building committee. We just completed our 2 new elementary schools on time and under budget, and I am the current chair of the Board of Finance. With respect to commitment, my husband and I are committed to living here for the rest of our lives. We're going to be buried here. So we're not going anywhere. I am committed to Stonington and its sustainability for the future. My leadership skills, I believe that my years of experience in business, managing people, budgets, and projects to successful completion has given me the skills as your leader on the Board of Selectmen to prioritize and plan for Stonington's future.
Thank you. And next will be John Prue, and you have a minute.
Thank you, Paul.
We won't be running the clock, and there's always something.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Thank you to the Como for hosting us tonight. I have very fond memories of coaching soccer and picking up the kids from the summer camp, and this is a big part of our kids growing up, and thank you again for hosting us. My name is John Prue, and I am a candidate for first selectman of the town of Stonington. I have served for the last 2 years as a selectman. I am running to finish the good work we have started and initiate the new projects that this town must undertake. I'm running with Deb Downey because she is experienced, knowledgeable, and well-respected in the community. As the town charter states, this is the chief executive officer position for the town of Stonington. The job requires a broad skill set, a broad base of knowledge, and not a specialized skill. Well, I know all the ins and outs of Stonington government and have worked with all the departments. We have achieved the highest bond rating possible, improved our schools, improved our flood insurance rating, and added 2 new facilities with Hartford Healthcare. These are some of the good things that I like to see continue.
Thank you. And Debra Downey.
My name's Debra Downey. I've lived in Stonington for 25 years and for over 20 have volunteered on local community committees and commissions. I've served 2 terms on the Board of Education. I've been a member of the K-12 Building Committee since 2014. I've been on the Wetlands Commission for over 15 years, including serving as chairman and vice chairman. I've been a member of the Water Pollution Control Authority since 2015, and I'm a member of the Stonington Stormwater Task Force. For many years, I served as community co-chair of the Sub-Base Superfund Restoration Advisory Board, helping the public make sense of technical data presented by the consultants. I've been married for over 31 years, and I have 3 children that went through the Stonington School. My son is a captain in the Army with 2 children of his own. I have a bachelor's degree in geology and in biology, and a master's degree in hydrogeology, and have worked as a Connecticut licensed environmental professional for over 30 years, helping private companies and municipalities investigate and remediate contaminated properties. I'm running because I love this town and want to do what I can to make it better.
Thank you very much. And then with that, we'll get to the start to get to the questions, and our timekeepers can start keeping track of the time that we've used. And the first question goes to the Democratic ticket. It comes from a member of the audience here tonight, and they ask that, given that there is a good chance of further losses in state funding and perhaps loss of all state funding given the state's budget problems, how will you prepare us to mitigate the loss, and what steps have you taken in your experience that will help you deal with such a situation? And Democrats get the first chance to comment on that.
Thank you so much. This is a question that we've actually talked about at length on the Board of Finance, as you can imagine. So there's a number of steps we have to take, but first, just to say, I think the combination of June and my experience serving on the Board of Finance will have us be very well positioned to address this. We've already taken steps on the Board of Finance, and long before I joined it, they made excellent decisions to be sure Stonington is in a unique place within the state of Connecticut. We are able to stand on our own 2 feet, but we need to ensure we can continue to do that going forward. I think the mixture of my experience with the Economic Development Commission, serving with many very innovative and creative thinkers, will help get us to that next step where we can't be reactive with these problems. We have to be proactive. We have to think outside the box. We already are looking at some different sites down in downtown Pawcatuck where I think some of the opportunities might not pan out, but I think they will. We're trying to be creative, innovative, proactive, and I think actually sometime in November we'll have some exciting plans to share with the community on that. But those are the types of things I think we need to be doing to be sure that we are both growing the grand list while also looking at the efficiencies we can gain on our budget. And I'm sure June has some to add.
Being independent of the funding that we get from the state of Connecticut is something that the Board of Finance has considered for the past number of budget cycles. And this year was the first year that the state did come down and say that they were going to cut our education cost sharing grant over the next 10 years. So we have planned for that. When we recently went through our rating evaluation for the last bond that we borrowed for, and got our AAA rating, one of the questions was, how are you going to become independent and not be dependent upon any grants that you get from the state? And because we've been working on this for so many years now and we have a plan in place, the Board of Education has done a tremendous job with consolidating the schools, coming in with 0 budget increase last year, and adjusting for this decrease in the education cost sharing grant. So I think we are, we've planned for it, and we are well on our way for taking care of it and being independent.
And our Republican candidates, their thoughts on how Stonington can prepare for the possibility of reduced state funding and perhaps elimination at some point of state funding.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a possibility. I think it's going to be a likelihood. We should expect for it. We expect that to happen. We get about $1.3 million from the state of Connecticut in education cost sharing this year. I think we should fight for every penny that we get. We certainly contribute a lot more to Hartford than we get back. So we need to continue to fight for that $1.3 million, but I think there needs to be, the reality of it is we're going to end up losing that over time. Planning ahead, you know, decisions were made by the Board of Finance 20 years ago that have us in great condition, great shape right now financially. There was a conscious decision to increase the savings account. There was a conscious decision to be very careful with what we spent money on, and those are all bearing fruit right now. And we should all, you know, recognize that this was a long process with many people that got us to this point.
Thank you.
I echo a lot of what John said. I think it's important that we look at growing our grand list and doing it with smart growth, and doing it smartly, sorry. Because we can't continue to put a tax burden on our residents. We can't just say, okay, the state's cutting the funding, let's increase taxes. That just isn't going to work. My 8 years on Board of Education gave me a lot of experience in looking at budgets, trying to be more transparent, seeing what we could do to cut or consolidate, and consolidating the schools this year was, you know, part of that.
Any further thoughts from what you heard? I don't know if we can maybe take the mics right out of the stand, if that's a possibility. I probably should have thought of that before we began. Sorry.
That doesn't make any less noise.
No, okay, well. We did all kinds of sound checks, but you can't plan on everything. Any more comments from the Democrats from what they heard before we move on to something else?
No, with respect to the possibility of the loss of state funding, I have no more comments.
All right, thank you. With that, we'll move on to the second question, and this the Republican ticket gets the first crack at this one. Debra Downie mentioned expanding the tax base, part of the solution. The Smilers Wharf development, those developers talked about the expansion of the tax base that would provide, but the plan obviously generated considerable controversy before being withdrawn by the developers. What role, if any, would you see for the next Board of Selectmen concerning what happens with that critical property? And Republicans get the first comment on that one.
So I'm 100% committed to getting that property redeveloped. I think there's potential for a lot of grand list growth on that property. With that all said, it needs to be in a scale and scope that fits within the neighborhood, fits harmoniously within that area of Mystic. I really would love to see a world-class or first-class marina in close proximity to the Mystic River Bridge. I think we can get a lot more people, tourists in, without adding any additional traffic. There are boat destinations up and down the East Coast that we could benefit from. You know, I think there's a great opportunity there, but it needs to fit within the neighborhood. It can't be too big, and it needs to conform to our plan of conservation and development.
Deborah?
I agree with John, but there needs to be a lot more. There were community conversations, but there need to be a lot more conversations with the residents in that area to understand their concerns and priorities, understand their concerns with traffic, and look at different options for traffic before just developing it. We also have to really consider coastal resiliency with the development of that property. Thanks.
And Democratic ticket, again, the question is about Smilers Wharf development. The project was withdrawn. What role, if any, would you see for the next Board of Selectmen concerning what happens with that critical property?
No, and I'm so glad that Deb brought up the community conversations, because on the Economic Development Commission, when I first joined about 4 years ago, under then leadership of Blunt White, was chair at the time, we started the model of community conversations, and it ranges from talking about a zone change to engaging the community neighbors when conflict arises between potentially a business and the residents. We've engaged in many different models, and to me, this is something that we need to scale up. We've done a great job of it on the EDC, but it needs to be put at the next level. And I think by having the Board of Selectmen help spearhead some of this, working with the Planning Department, the Economic Development Commission, and then bringing in other commissions. And as Deb mentioned, bringing in, we have to look at an issue of flooding, we need to bring in other commissions and other experts to be part of these conversations, as well as the neighbors and concerned residents. I think one of the things that struck me, throughout my experience working in this town and volunteering, but also even more going door to door with June and getting to meet even more people, is I think we don't give ourselves enough credit as Stonington for what a diverse community we actually have. We have people with such fascinating backgrounds, different expertise, and we can do more to tap into that. The community conversations are one good model, but we can do more to explore how we can bring our community together for, I think, more positive and respectful conversations where we hear each other, we acknowledge each other's challenges, and then we solve the problems together.
June?
So I work in the Allen School building. So I pass the boat buildings every single day, a couple times a day, and would welcome any type of development on that property. But the development really needs to make sure it fits into the neighborhood. Mystic has parking issues. Mystic has flooding issues. And so those are the types of things that need to be addressed for the next piece that goes around. I love the character and the culture of marinas. I think they're critical to what our economy is in Stonington, what our culture is here in Stonington. So I'm all for development as long as it's balanced and fitting with the neighborhood. The whole idea of community conversations and getting more people involved and aligned with the development anywhere in town, and even there, I think would be welcomed and useful.
All right, thank you. I'm going to move on. The Democrats' ticket gets the next shot at this question. It's a related question. With the departure of Planning Director Jason Vincent, what qualities should the town be looking for in the next Planning Director? And do you share Mr. Vincent's concerns that the rejection of Smiler Wharf and problems faced by other projects are giving an anti-development reputation for the town of Stonington? And Democratic ticket gets the first chance on that one.
No, first, and let me just say, I think many of us will miss Jason so much, and he will be impossible to replace as who he was. But going forward, on the EDC, we worked very closely with Jason. He attended almost all of our meetings. He was a great advocate. I think what he taught us was, how important it is to have someone who can engage with the community. We really need someone who also listens to the community and then can kind of translate that into both planning and zoning. There are so many different aspects to this role and to what we need as a community that it's not just, you have to take a very unique individual to fill that role, but it's one that I think will pull different experts into to identify that. But in regards to an anti-development sentiment, that is one area I would slightly disagree. I think we have to be careful that we don't fall into that, but I don't think we're there right now. I think we need to keep doing things to reduce approval risk, but I think going forward, we've set a good tone in Stonington, and I think as long as we continue down this path of working with both the community and developers, I think that we'll be in a good position going forward.
June?
So when Jason, in 2002, when Jason first came to Stonington, I was on the interview committee. And it's a very rigorous process when you hire somebody in that capacity. And it will be no less rigorous the next time when we go to hire somebody to replace Jason. Jason had great leadership skills as well. So there are several qualities that we'll look for in the next director of planning. With respect to people not wanting to develop here, when I first moved here, Stonington had the nickname of being called Zonington. And we do have really good zoning rules and regulations, and I think development is encouraged here. I mean, if you look at some of the development that's going on right now, I don't think that there's been too many no's. So, I think if you look at the zoning regulations, you look at the neighborhoods where development is going to occur, where it's proposed, things are approved more than they are rejected.
All right, Republicans, whoever wants to start. The question is, what qualities would you be looking for in a planning director? And this thoughts expressed by Mr. Vincent that he's concerned Stonington may be getting an anti-development reputation.
No, both very good questions. The ideal director of planning would continue to streamline or make more transparent the land use processes in this town. It's fairly well laid out, but it's still, there are things that trip up people, that trip up developers, and cost and hurdles that are unknown. We need to put those all out there in front of them so that anybody that's coming to town would understand those risks. We have, in terms of people shying away from Stonington, I do think there's some application risks, and there's some risk with applying at this time. There is a bit of for lack of a better word, a hangover from the Smiler's Wharf thing that will work its way out over time. We've just seated some additional members to the Planning and Zoning Commission, very thoughtful, very experienced people, and I think that there's going to be we're going to get back to a midpoint here pretty quickly with planning and zoning and land use applications.
I will also miss working with Jason. I worked with him during both his tenures here in the town, since I've been on wetlands for a long time, and he had wonderful leadership qualities and was very innovative. I do not believe there's a negative aspect to development here. I think we just need to make sure we stay fair, consistent, and transparent in our applications and approvals. I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities with redeveloping brownfields and other areas here in town.
All right, thank you. Next question goes to the Republican ticket, and I'd like to begin with Mr. Prue. A recent column citing some of your comments brought into question your commitment to addressing rising sea levels impacting Stonington. So I'd like to hear from you if you could clarify your position on meeting the challenge the town faces, and I'd like to obviously hear from the other candidates their take on meeting that challenge. And we'll begin with Mr. Prue.
No, so it's a good question and fair question, and at the beginning, I spent 40 minutes with David Collins, and his column looked nothing like the conversation we had. But anyway, we know temperatures are rising, we know sea levels are rising, and we know that human influence is part of that. And coastal resiliency is becoming more and more of a front burner issue for us. We have, the cumulative effect of seas rising for the last 200 years or whatever that is, and it's affecting Mystic right now. There is flooding in Mystic right now. In regards to the coastal adaptation line item, that was essentially the budget hearing that the Board of Selectmen conducted, we did pass that through. It came to us with a staff recommendation of level C. The Board of Selectmen unanimously passed that through as a level C at $100,000. We passed it on to the Board of Finance, and that dollar amount for coastal adaptation was actually cut down to $10,000 once it got to finance. So the Board of Selectmen did our part. It's something I take very seriously. It's a very challenging issue and very serious issue for the town going forward. but we're kind of grasping at straws in some ways, not really knowing what we're doing because we haven't pegged a number, which comes back to we have our coastal resiliency plan, which is a very, very important document. We got it. We were able to produce this because we received a $150,000 grant. And the value of this document is many ways, but the most important thing to me is it identifies the critical infrastructure of the town that's vulnerable to sea level rise. So we may not know exactly when, but we know what is going to be impacted in this town very quickly.
Deborah?
Okay. As a geologist, I definitely believe in climate change and the sea level rise. And in addition, here in New England, we have to face the aspect of the land subsidence because it's still recovering from the glaciers when they retreated over 10,000 years ago. So we have both sea level rise and land subsidence here. We do have at least a plan to start the conversation with the coastal resiliency plan. The town is already starting to plan as required by the state, and they do have guidelines that came out of UConn. See if I get this right. It's the coastal, the Institute for Resiliency and Climate Adaptation, I think, that sets the guidelines in partnership with the state. So I think, thank you, and I do agree with John's comments.
John, just to clarify before we get the Democrats a chance on this one. So was it during the discussion of whether to pass along the $100,000 expenditure that you expressed some concerns whether the program is matching up with the data, but ultimately you approved that and passed it on to the Board of Finance?
We did, and you know, we could get in the weeds really, really quickly, but I'm looking at where the United Nations International Panel on Climate Change is. That's the middle of the road for me in terms of their projections, and this report goes a little bit further than where the UN IPCC is, but that's getting in the weeds, so I don't know if I answered your question. But
that's fine.
But I think that, you know, we've got, the United Nations is the gold standard for climate change and climate research, and you know, if somebody moves far to either side of that body of science, they're kind of out there all alone in my mind.
Thank you. Democrats, could hear from that side of the table.
So with respect to the Board of Finance and how SIP projects come to the Board of Finance, at that meeting in January, there was a request to increase the code on this item from a C, which is needed, to a B, which is urgent. And it was at that meeting that the B, urgent, was declined. The Board of Finance, in all of the years that I've been on it, when we get the budget, the first thing that we look at is what is committed as far as capital improvement projects and what is urgent. The C's are rarely funded. The Board of Finance, so this year we were successful in at least getting the members to approve a $10,000 commitment to a level C item in the budget. And having that line item funded, even that $10,000, was critical to, when you go for a AAA rating, everything has to be in line. And this was one of the missing items. Yes, our fiscal prudence is important. Our tax collection rate is critical. The amount of money that we have in our rainy day fund is all very important, but acknowledging our coastal vulnerability was also important. And having this funded was one of those items that was critical. As far as where do we start, we do have a plan in place. UConn has done studies. The Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut was funded, did a 114-page study for Stonington, based on a grant from the Natural Conservancy Organization. You have NOAA, you have NASA, there are so many different data points that are out there. There is an organization that measures sea level every 6 minutes, from satellites to the buoys, and so it's happening. We have a climate change and a coastal resiliency task force that's waiting for tasks. So as on the Board of Selectmen, we would have them compile data so that we can figure out what's best for us.
And Ms. Chesebrough?
No, just to add, I mean, June and I have talked about this a good deal. I mean, this is a big part of why both of us are running. We don't feel like this is something you can put off. I appreciate John's reference to the UN IPCC. I don't personally work with them, but a lot of my colleagues do. And all of their data points to the fact that this is accelerating. This is worse than we thought. We can't put this off till tomorrow. We have to start working on this. And to June's point, I mean, we have a climate change task force that is full of experts and interesting and motivated people who have been waiting to get tasks. They're waiting. I think as the Board of Selectmen, that would be one of the first things we do, would be sit down and meet with these people who are giving their time as volunteers to our town and give them the tasks they've been waiting for so they can take this work forward together. And I think June covered a lot of the rest of it, so I'll yield my time there.
Any response from what you heard, Mr. Prue or Ms. Downey? No? All right. Well, so Danielle Chesebrough, so do you feel there's been a lack of urgency from the existing administration?
You don't want to let this question go.
Well, your answer seemed to suggest that, so I'm just trying to clarify.
Yes, I mean, I think it was under Rob Simmons that we got the grant for the study that John held up. So I mean, that's excellent. But now the plan has been there and it's been stagnant. And I believe that yes, it's been stagnant, and we need to make this a priority. And I also understand there's so many pressing priorities. If June and I get elected, we'll probably be here in 2 years having similar questions thrown at us why certain priorities weren't made for other issues. There's only so much time in a day, but we're saying for us, if you elect us, this will be a priority.
Mr. Prue, one more chance. Is it plan stagnant?
No. So I've got 4 or 5 years of public comments, all pointing to there's a tide gauge that is owned or controlled by NOAA. It's on State Pier in New London. And, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've just been saying that piece of scientific data, that instrument that reports all the time, needs to be part of the conversation. And I've gotten a fair amount of pushback on, bringing that data point into the conversation. And I think that's something that we need to do. It's there. Anybody can look at it on their computer, on their iPhone, 24/7, 365. It's there. And we should use that as a baseline or an understanding locally, because it is a rock solid data point.
All right, thank you. With that, unless there's something else, Deborah, you wanted to add? Okay. With that, I'm going to move on to a different topic, but it's water related. And this question begins with the Democratic side. It has now been over 3 years since voters at a town meeting approved bonding $2.2 million to create the Mystic River Boathouse Park. The plan has since been beset with one problem after another. How much of a priority should it be for the next Board of Selectmen to see this project is completed, or should the town throw in the towel? First, try with the Democrats.
So I was on the Board of Finance when the bond came before us for approval for a referendum. And of the $2.2 million, there is over $400,000 left to build the park for a town park. And also there's $200,000 of a grant for the remediation of the site. So there's over $600,000 still in the budget of that $2.2 million to proceed with the park. So I think proceeding with the park is something that we should do. The cost to complete the park is about the same amount that we have left to proceed with the park. The boathouse is another issue, and what gets done with the building is it's something else. But I think as far as public access and access to the water is something we can definitely proceed with.
And Ms. Chesebrough, do you want to comment?
No, I mean, just to say, full disclosure, I wrote at Stonington, but I can be impartial when looking at this issue. I mean, I think what June said, I mean, this happened before I was on the Board of Finance, but the taxpayer spoke. They wanted a boathouse, they wanted a park with access to the water. We have the budget to do that. It's already set aside. We should see that through. That's not to say that should be done at the detriment to other projects. Just to say, for example, on the Economic Development Commission, we started looking at some really excited projects along the Pawcatuck River, which recently received the wild and designated status. So, I think we can have both. I think sometimes the conversations we've been hearing going around the community, it sometimes seems like it's this or that, and it doesn't have to be. We can do both. We can serve the borough, Pawcatuck, Mystic all together. We can achieve all these things we want to achieve by working together. And just on the boathouse in particular, like June said, the money's there, that's been voted on, and now looking forward, we should look at what else we can do to improve water access in other parts of our town along our other rivers and waterways.
All right, Republicans, thoughts on the Mystic River Boathouse Park and what might happen under your administration?
So we're committed to building the Boathouse Park, and if elected, Deb would be the liaison from the Board of Selectmen to that group because her professional background in environmental problems is very, very important and needed over there. I mean, I hate to say this, but I think there's a lesson here beyond what to do now, but we didn't do our due diligence in advance, and it's a lesson that we've learned as a community, as leaders. We can pick up the pieces and move on, and that's what we fully intend to do, to get this property, get it built, get the park built, and hopefully get the boathouse done.
Do this without
Thank you.
making a horrible noise. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're sorry too. One thing we didn't think of is passing the mic back and forth. We checked everything else.
So, full disclosure for me, I was one of the minority at the town meeting who did not approve of purchasing the property because I was familiar with it from previous projects, and I didn't think we had enough information on the nature of the contamination or the cost to remediate it. So I didn't think it was a good idea. But that said, we own it, and I think at a minimum we need to complete the development of the park so we do have public access on this property. And there are ways to control and remediate it that we can allow public access and minimize risks to the public and to the river. Thanks.
I want to go back to June, since you first brought it up. So I want to make sure I understand. So you're saying $600,000 left, that may be enough to complete the park and the environmental cleanup, and then some other mechanism would have to be found to fund the boathouse?
I believe that funding the boathouse was always going to be from private contributions. It wasn't going to be from the taxpayer. So having the park, and this is information that as of September 4th, 2019, this is the budget. It's available at the finance department. So anybody can go and see exactly how much was in the bond, how much was spent for the property, how much has been spent for planning on the property so far, and the next steps that are required for completing the park. So,
Anybody else want to give? Okay. I think the next question goes to the Republican ticket. When I was here for the selectmen debate a couple of years ago, Rob Simmons, our Stonington first selectman, floated the idea of forming a charter revision commission to consider a switch to a town manager form of government. I'd like to hear if our candidates have any interest in pursuing that, and let's begin with the Republican ticket.
So I've said on many occasions, that I'm in favor of a 5-member Board of Selectmen. I just think it would be very helpful, beneficial, deliberative to the government of Stonington to have 2 additional members. It makes it easier to talk without getting into majority or a meeting status under the Freedom of Information laws, because 2 people talking creates a meeting because it's a 3-member board. So that is problematic all by itself. As far as going to a charter change to a town manager form of government, I know it was studied years ago. I'd like to see it studied again. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but I want to see it studied. I want to know what elements of Stonington government would be consolidated or collapsed or would answer to a town manager. And the first one that comes to mind is the police department. We have a board of police commissioners that has a budget and operating control of the police department. Would the police department answer to a town manager or a board of police commissioners? And these are substantive questions that have really, I'd like to hear what the community has to say on that.
Deborah?
I agree. I know we've looked at it in the past, but I think that it's something that does warrant being looked at again. I don't know how I feel about it either way, because I'd like to see the results of that. You know, will it save us money? Will it help consolidate the government here in town? But I don't know, but I think it's worth looking at.
Democratic candidates?
Well, this is something I started looking at a bit, but again, I think like everyone else, we need to look more at it. But just to say, I mean, in the initial research that I did read on the subject, I do think we need to open the charter, but not just to look at the question of town manager. We need to look at setting term limits, the length of the term for the first selectman. And also one of the things I read in a consultancy study that was done a few years back is also looking at the hiring of the tax collector. We've been so unbelievably fortunate in this community to have Linda Camilio as our tax collector, but there's a real risk there. Right now, it's something that people elect. I think that's another thing that should be looked at in terms of the charter is if we should move to hiring of that position. But again, we'd open it up, we'd do more research, we'd get community input, and then we'd evaluate all these issues together.
So I'm in support of looking at the charter and a charter revision. The town manager is one thing that we could always do some more research on and see the impact that would have. It would change our form of government here in Stonington. I do think the other things, if we do keep the Board of Selectmen, increasing the term to 4 years, but having term limits for the Board of Selectmen, I think is critical. And looking at our, not just the tax collector, but the town clerk, and having those as hired positions rather than elected positions. I can say that the things that we can do here in town with our fiscal prudency and our budgets and our rainy day fund are really thanks to our tax collector. She does a phenomenal job. She collects taxes over and above what we budget. So if we lose somebody like that over the next election, we could lose our AAA status. I mean, it's really that clear. So those are the types of things that opening up the charter for a charter revision would be looking at, not just a town manager possibility, but other things as well.
Any thoughts on the Democratic side about enlarging the board to 5?
Looking at everyone from the day. I know the FOI requirements can make it challenging for the board sometimes to communicate and discuss matters. So I mean, again, I think that's something we could look at expanding, but again, it should be something that we do with a lot of evaluation and looking also at what other communities around us have done and learned from it. Because I think sometimes we put a Band-Aid on a problem when it's not really what's needed.
And any thoughts on the Republicans on the idea of extending the terms to 4 years and having term limits? You've been on the board, Mr. Prue.
I mean, I think 2 years is working. It certainly is difficult. It's challenging. It's no fun to run for elected public office, but it does make the system work.
Anything further on that one? Can our timekeepers, maybe if you have like a blank part on one of your sheets, kind of jot down approximately how much time the candidates have, so I know where we are and they know where we are.
12 minutes? 12 minutes.
12 on the, and how about here? 13, wow, we're doing really good. 13 and 12. That never happens. Okay, the next question is going to begin with the Democrats. We have 2 Republican candidates here, 1 Democrat and 1 unaffiliated candidate. I'd like to hear from the candidates discuss why they have the political affiliation they do or don't, and what it says about their approach to governing. And it starts on the Democratic ticket side.
Okay, so since I'm the only Democrat that's up here, so I'm a Democrat for several reasons, but I do first I do want to say that I consider myself a very conservative Democrat. I totally believe in fiscal responsibility. I do believe in fair pay. As a woman in the workplace, I've never wanted to have my evaluations or qualifications judged by my gender, but by the actual job that I do. So I am really for equal pay. Women are still behind even in this country. So as far as that's why I'm a Democrat, but I do want to say that I believe in balanced budgets and living within your means.
And Danielle?
Yeah. No, thank you for the opportunity to address this. I mean, being completely honest, so I went to undergrad at Clemson, which was much more leaning in one direction, and then UConn, which was leaning in another direction. And I got tremendous value out of both of those educations. Also, I grew up in a family that liked lively dinner table discussions. We were a very mixed bag of views, and that's just how I was raised. But more so than that, I mean, to me, I'm unaffiliated and staying that way because I believe in the power of competition. I think competition drives innovation, it helps our economy, and that's not just true in business, that's true in government. I don't think we should have to fit into one box or the other to serve our community. And I can personally attest to how challenging it is to serve, even at the local level, if you're not affiliated. And if it's not for the open-mindedness of the Stonington Democratic Town Committee, when I first ran for the Board of Finance 2 years ago, to take a chance on me, I wouldn't be sitting here today. So I do think it's something we need to get more civically minded people engaged, and it shouldn't matter what party they are or are not.
The Republicans, why do you affiliate with the Republican Party, and how might that reflect in your governing?
Well, I mean, Stonington is a very nonpartisan town at the end of the day, and decisions are sometimes made along party lines, but very, very rarely. They're made more at the polls than in the governance of the town. So fiscally, I'm conservative. Socially, I'm probably a libertarian, and I don't know if that makes me a Republican at the end of the day or not, but I think I fit in a little bit better with the Republican ideals, but I can certainly relate to the blue-collar union working class. I'm not too far away from where they want to be. It's something I don't give a lot of thought to. I've just been a Republican. I grew up in a Republican household, but it really, I'm John Prue at the end of the day. I'm not a Republican at the end of the day.
Thank you. And Deborah?
So I also grew up in a very politically active Republican household, but then I went off to college, and like June, my first job, it was me and 80 guys working offshore Texas on an oil rig. And I learned very quickly to fight for equal pay and equal rights. And so I am actually I'm a fiscal conservative, but I do believe in if there's something innovative and something worthwhile to spend money on, so try something new that's good for the town and good for the people, I do support that.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that from the candidates. Next question begins with the Republicans, and that was the ideological question. This is the meat and potato question. What can be done about the parking shortage in the village of Mystic? And we got that several times in emails. That was a popular question that people emailed in, a little upset with the parking situation, particularly in summer.
I know there's been some hesitancy in some areas, but I do think we should look at possibly 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 streets that were resident only. And I think that would take a lot of the burden and the pressure off the residents who are constantly bombarded with having guests over and not being able to find parking for them. So we have many, many parking spaces. I think the number I heard was like there's 4,200 parking spaces on the Stonington side of Mystic. So we've got very restrictive parking requirements in our zoning regulations. I see it. I know there's a parking problem, but it's not like there's a magic wand we can wave and it's going to make it go away. Mystic is a tourist destination. It drives a lot of the economy locally, but I feel for the people that just want to live in a quaint, beautiful village and find that the traffic and the parking is too much.
Deborah?
I was actually surprised to learn a few years ago that there wasn't some kind of a traffic study that the town could use of Mystic. And I think we do need to do better talking to residents before we make a decision. This is really going to impact them. Maybe the idea of some streets with residential only parking might not be a bad idea as long as it works for the residents. You know, I don't think we should be making a decision without their input. That's one thing that always struck me about the Boathouse Park. You know, we're going to develop this park, but are Mystic residents going to be able to park in it, or is it going to be all tourist parking? So.
Democrats, what can be done about the parking shortage in the village of Mystic, particularly in the tourist season?
I'm not going to lie, I'm pretty excited for this question. I think this is such a manageable problem that we can figure out together. I grew up in downtown Mystic when we first moved here, and my mom still lives down there. But you know, I was actually speaking with the police chief recently, and I understand that he's been meeting with Groton side to talk about doing this comprehensive traffic study, which is completely needed, and it's so exciting that they're taking this forward and being so proactive about this. I think we get about 3 million visitors a year. We also want our residents to be able to use all the great restaurants and stores and shops down there. Also, in talking with people when we've been going door to door and meeting with people, our residents have some really exciting ideas. They all need to be tested and fleshed through, and that's why this comprehensive parking and traffic study would be such an excellent, I think, use of time to take a pause, but gather all these ideas. But just to say some that I know Jason Vincent was looking at before he left, and other residents have raised, are talking with Amtrak about the parking that they actually have behind the fire station in Mystic, talking to Acme Wire, a business right by the train station, also looking at potentially acquiring some property sort of behind the Friendlies right by exit 90. Other people have raised the idea of using a water taxi, engaging with the private sector for sort of partnership there, or a trolley. Other communities like ours have made these things work, these public-private partnerships. You can sometimes even make money on them. I think there's a lot of opportunities we have at hand that we haven't tried yet. And just because we try something once, if it doesn't work, we can try another thing. But I do think the leadership that the police commission and officers have taken to start the talks on this traffic study are excellent, and that should be an immediate first step that we help support.
And June?
So again, I work down there, and in the summertime, I'm absolutely thrilled to see the traffic for the bridge go all the way back to the Mystic train station. I know the people that are in that traffic aren't as thrilled, but I know it's dollars coming into our economy. And because I live here, I know where to park. I know the side streets where you can park. Parking in downtown Mystic is an issue. There's a parking lot on the Groton side. We really don't have a dedicated parking lot on the Stonington side. So first, starting with a traffic study, a comprehensive traffic study with the residents involved is the first step.
John or Deborah, any further thoughts on what you heard? No? Okay, we'll move on to another question. Democrats get this one first. What might be done or should be done with the Stillman Avenue mill site? And we'll begin with the Democrats.
No, I mean, and actually I know Deb and John have worked more on this, and I think a lot of people are concerned, so I'm happy to yield more time to them to respond to this. But to me, I think it's important that we don't make any promises, because I don't, at least on our side, I don't think we have the full picture yet of what we're talking about or what we're dealing with in terms of the depth of contamination or what could potentially be done with the site going forward. But it is something that whoever's in the role of first and second and third selectmen are going to have to address going forward. And I also think it brings up, though, an opportunity we have as a community that we have other buildings and lots that are vacant or at risk that we can think more innovatively and proactively about how we address them. Each site is going to be unique and different, and the Stillman Avenue Mill had a whole nother layer of complications that other sites don't have, or they have different complications. So not to oversimplify it, but I do think we can learn as a community from this kind of tragedy that happened with this beautiful historic old building and the contamination that is there right along the river. And we can think about how we want to address these more proactively. It might mean more money up front, an investment that we have to make as a community, but I think for some of the buildings that now are at risk, there could be a good return on investment. And I understand most of them are in the private sector hands, but for example, one of the owners that owns the Campbell Grain property, we've been working hands-on with him. He's eager to sell, he's been amazing to work with, and he's been really proactive, and so have we, in trying to address how we develop that site. And I think we could be more proactive in reaching out to other owners and show them that the town's willing to work with them. We have ideas of how we can help them, and we could try and start moving these properties forward.
June?
I'm just talking about other properties and working with the owners. That's called the shovel-ready and conceptual design that we are investing in as a town for some of these property owners. With respect to the Stillman Mill, we don't own that piece of property yet. I mean, I know we have a responsibility. When the building was collapsing into the river, the town took over and stopped the bricks in the building from falling into the river. We remediated the site as much as we can. We've spent over $700,000 doing that on property that we don't own. I think we will eventually end up owning it, but right now it's in legal. It's in a legal bind. Some people have said to me, "Do you really want to own it?" But I think we have a responsibility of property that's so close to the river. In a site that's contaminated, I think we need to do something with it. But once we actually own it and can get in there and really find out what's going on, we just have to wait for that moment.
Republican table?
So the next steps are kind of critical with the mill. There is brownfield money available at the state and federal level. Some of it you need to apply for before you own the property. Some of it you have to have actual title to the property. There's two risks there. There's the immediate risk of the known environmentals that go back to really the last time they were looked at or tested was in 2005. They've been known, they're disclosed. We've worked with the environmental professionals when we started remediating the site or remediating the building from the site. So there's the risk to the river, but there's also the risk to the water supply. And it's a sole source water supply that serves all of Westerly, all of Pawcatuck. And the environmental regulations have gotten a little bit more strict. So we are going to have to, if we take title to the property, we are going to have to deal with probably some PCBs that are in the ground. And that's public knowledge. We haven't actually done a risk assessment yet, and it's because we do not own the property, but those next steps are critical, and that's where it is right now. We've successfully cleaned it up. We are into this building for $700,000, but there was no option to not have town expend the money to do that. We couldn't just leave a building falling into the river or a pile of debris on the ground.
Thank you. Deborah? And again, I apologize. Microphone.
Yes, as John said, there's still a lot we don't know. There was a study, there was actually a remedial action plan done back in the early 2000s with plans to redevelop the facility for residential use. And I have, been in on discussions with the EPA and the state about the property, but there hasn't been any investigation done of the subsurface since 2005. So we don't know right now what current conditions are. And so we don't know what remedial options or costs are. And like John said, we don't own the property. And do we want to own the property? So the first step is trying to figure that out. Do we want to own it? Are there other alternatives? So we need to have, regulators and certainly legal counsel involved and see what the options are for that. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Anything else from what you heard on the Democratic side? Maybe you could just tell me the time first for the Democrats?
5 minutes, 20 seconds.
All right, about 5 minutes. And how about 6 minutes? So we're pretty close. The next question I have is just going to be for our first selectman candidates, and it's going to begin with John. As first selectman, you're also chief executive. more the face of the town, I think, than the other members of the Board of Selectmen at the various functions and such, a part of the responsibility. Every chief executive tends to have his or her style. Mr. Simmons has his style. So I just like if you could describe for voters what they might, what style are they getting, what personality and leadership would you bring to the job of being first selectman, and you get first crack at that, John.
So I'm not the Rob Simmons personality. Styles. My style, I guess, is to just identify the problems and seek the solutions. Problems are going to come at the first selectman every day of the week, and it's important that action be taken or something be studied, but really this is a leadership position where people are going to come to the first selectman and say, I need a decision on this now. That's kind of how I've run my business, where I've always had to be that person making the decisions. So I guess the style would be decisive, but not, and I'm kind of a low-key person at the same time. I don't, I just want to get the job done. I just want to serve the public.
Thank you. And Danielle?
I agree with John. No one can replace Rob Simmons' spirit and enthusiasm for this community. To me, in my professional experience, and I think also on the boards and commissions that I've served on, my kind of guiding principle is always about collaborative leadership. I think by bringing people together, we get better ideas. When we listen to each other, we challenge each other to think differently. That's how we're going to come up with really good solutions and how we're going to move forward as a community. I will also agree, though, with John that I do think at the end of the day you have to be decisive. So you do the research, you bring the people together, you have the conversation, but at the end of the day you have to make a decision and you have to weigh it for the whole town. And that's very challenging, and that's something that I've had direct experience with on the Board of Finance. I have to say, going in, I thought it would be easier than it was. It's really hard to have to say no to people and to have to really think about the whole town and not just where you're coming in or what your personal views are. It's about weighing the big picture and making the decision at the end of the day that works for the whole town. And so that's how I would try and approach this position.
All right, thank you. And next question, it goes to both our tickets. It begins this time with the Democrats. It came from the audience. Do you think there is any need to improve transparency and public trust in the Stonington administration? And if so, what ideas might you have to improve the level of public trust and the confidence and transparency? And Democrats go first.
You can go. You don't know your silence.
So in my professional work, my kind of favorite part about it is, we were talking about this the other day, is why we're laughing, is breaking down silos. That's what I do every day for work, is I try and work with whether it's companies or investors within the corporation itself, or by bringing them together. It's all about how do we break down these silos to have people work more together. And once you're working on a project together and you're collaborating, it's how you get these better ideas out there. And at the end of the day, it is all about transparency. And how we'd apply that at the town level is, I think we need to have boards and commissions work closer together. We need more liaison assignments. We have them on the Board of Finance. I think they've worked well. We could amp them up a bit. But other boards and commissions also need to cross-communicate. Because at the end of the day, we're all people. We live in this town and we love it. But sometimes I think we get so focused on our jurisdiction and we feel the need to protect it so much that we forget about the bigger picture. So I think it's really important that we bring everyone together. We'll help hold each other accountable at the end of the day by doing this. And I actually liked something Deb, I think, wrote in her article at the Connecticut Examiner. She talked a lot about this importance of collaboration across boards and commissions, and I really couldn't agree more. I think it's so essential, and it might seem simple, but at the end of the day, I think it's how we're going to get at some of our root problems.
June?
So I like the word silo, and I know on the Board of Finance we've really worked very hard to break those down. Working with the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Education, all the Board of Finance members, we've had some very spirited conversations and discussions and long meetings, but I think that's where everyone's thoughts about particular projects and ideas come out. I think by breaking down the silos that we've started to do, we've had budgets that have passed on the first referendum for the past 6 or 7 years. So continuing to do that. There are other critical aspects of the town, WPCA, continuing to do things with the Board of Education. We've been adding attachments to minutes so that the public can see what's happening in our budgets and where the money is going. So I like the term breaking down the silos, so that's what we continue to do.
And the Republicans, again, the question was, are our candidates satisfied with the level of public trust in government and transparency by government? If not, what ideas might they have?
You know, and I think Stonington, by and large, does a very good job with transparency. Our past was a little bit opaque. There were some areas where FOI was not being followed, and there's been training. Most of the boards and commissions are pretty rigid in following the freedom of information laws and being transparent, being open, not having rolling meetings or revolving meetings amongst their members. And you know, we can always do better. We can always do more training. But these are volunteers, and there are limits to how much we can task them in any given month to do additional work and additional. I mean, there's some boards and commissions that are very heavy lifts in terms of time commitment, and you know, they do get by. They do a good job by and large.
All right, thank you, Deborah.
Collaboration and working together is very important to me. And one thing that I have found over the years on different commissions I've been on, it's been frustrating when I hear this us versus them. You know, Board of Ed to Board of Finance, us versus them. Building committee to Board of Ed or Board of Finance, us versus them. And I keep saying, wait a minute, guys, we're working for the same thing. We're here for Stonington. We're all volunteers for Stonington. So, and I've pushed forward, you know, on the Board of Ed and on other committees, having at least a couple times a year where you get Board of Selectmen, Board of Ed, Board of Finance, and maybe other committees together so they can share their concerns, their priorities, and better understand where they're coming from. And that's really key, especially in budget season, so you understand what everyone's concerns are. So thank you.
Well, thank you. With that, I'm going to move to the final statements from our candidates. The time was pretty much equal. We're over our hour, and I promise I'd get us out of here. So if you guys get ready, you'll have 1 minute for the closing statement, and if our timekeepers could kind of switch from keeping track of the overall time for the 1 minute of closing statements. And we will begin with June Strunk.
So Danielle and I are on the Board of Finance, and our combined experience is over a decade. It's all about our budgets. It's all about where the money goes. Everybody works hard for everything that they've earned. Our taxpayers' dollars are respected. And as your Board of Selectmen, Danielle and I are elected, we will have the experience on the Board of Finance that no other Board of Selectmen has ever had. As far as, and other experiences with other boards and commissions. And when you combine our professional experience with working with people and budgets and projects and successfully completing them, I believe that with the two of us on the Board of Selectmen, we will bring Stonington to its future.
Thank you. And the Democratic First Selectman candidate, Danielle Chesebrough.
So no, just in closing, I mean, I think I just want to kind of leave these parting thoughts that I think as a community, we're not always going to agree, and we shouldn't, but we need to be respectful and really listen to each other. I think that we have a great opportunity in front of us to do great things together, not just in the next few years, but that can last for generations to come. And then I guess in closing, one thing I want to say is, I do think actions speak louder than words. So, it's great you guys all came here tonight. Thank you so much. But I'd also say, please ask around, talk to people that, I think for both of us that we've served with on boards and commissions that have experience working with us. And also people who've been on the other end of the table where maybe they haven't agreed with us, but how we handled those differences. And I'd say in the next week leading up to the election, talk to all these people so you can get to know who we really are, not just who we think we are, but talk to people who've worked with us. We've all been serving in town for quite some time, so I hope you take that on. And thank you.
Thank you. I hate to make you move that mic one more time, but Deborah, you're actually next, and then we'll finish with John. And you have a minute.
Better than next time you give me this mic.
We'll definitely get a new mic next time we're here 2 years from now.
So, John Prue and I together have combined decades of experience on nearly every town board or commission. We really understand the issues and how the town works. For me, this isn't a stepping stone into politics. It's a capstone to a long record of volunteer service. And I feel like I'm well suited to be selectman, especially working with John. I have over 20 years of nonpartisan collaboration and public service in Stonington. And I believe as selectwoman, I can continue to contribute positively to the town. Thank you.
Thank you. And the Republican candidate for first selectman, John Prue. And you have a minute.
Okay, again, thank you for everyone who made tonight possible. If elected first selectman, I promise that every decision will be in the best interest of the town of Stonington. I have the experience and prepared to lead on day one. Stonington is a jewel in a very troubled state. We know that. We face big challenges, but together we are up to the task. Our schools are new, our budgets are in balance, and people enjoy living here. We can protect the residential areas and still grow the grand list. We can preserve the character of the town. Complete Boathouse Park, continue the remediation of Stillman Avenue. I have 14-year history of working for this town in a bipartisan manner. It's a commitment to the community, and that's what motivates me. I'm not a politician, I'm a public servant at the end of the day. I ask for your vote, your support, and your prayers. Thank you.
All right, with that, we can applaud our candidates who are willing to talk with us tonight.